It's me, it's Alan Susie, your professor. All right, we're gonna have some fun with all this. We're gonna take a little bit of a look at the article and kind of finish it up where we are, and then I'm gonna drop some ideas and some thoughts and some things about NAGPRA on you all that kind of need to be explored because I was realizing that as we're going through these lecture videos, I'm really helping everybody work through the article, give you a lot of the background information, stuff like that. But one of the things that I've been flirting around is actually like giving you some more of the critical content and ways to approach it and ways to think about it and to unpackage, assess, evaluate, and to really kind of explore what these concepts are. And I think a lot of it, the hesitation is coming because when I'm doing and reviewing the work from people, I'm getting terrified because some people are like really progressing, other people are just like it's going the opposite direction. And so I'm trying to find a middle ground inside of there, and what's happening is the shackles put on me are like getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And I don't think I'm doing enough service and justice to the work that we're doing, and also you got to remember, I'm dealing with all these, on multiple classes. I have what, 6 classes that I'm teaching right now, and if they're averaging between 40 and 50 students, 60 students per class, say 50 just as around, that's 300 people, 300 students I'm working with. And everybody needs their own individual attention with it, and I only have so much bandwidth in my life, in my blood to kind of make it all happen. Then the fact that I was just in Missouri, Minnesota, sorry, I was just in Minnesota, and I had to rush back here because I was doing a presentation on the critical intersectionalities of Native hip hop as part of a company's Native American History Month celebration and affordability. So their action plan. Um, so coming back and then getting on all this and thinking about some stuff, I was just really kind of taking the time to ruminate as I haven't been asleep. No, actually, I take that back. I slept for a total of 5 hours in the last 48 hours. Trying to get everything managed and going and everything for everybody and pumping out your grades as fast as humanly possible. Um, I've just been really terrified about how people have been going and taking a little bit of an emphasis that I'm feeling like I'm not doing any service, and so I want to start exploring and then packaging and getting some more of the critical intent and directions as to where the articles are probing and pushing, rather than just kind of feeling like I'm doing the work for you. In which case, then the responses that are coming back are not taking into effect the work that I'm trying to help you unfold. And that's what's been pedagogically, disheartening, and it's really brought me down. I mean, the level of depression is like hit, like bottom floor. Um, and I don't need to be like that. And because I take your work very seriously. And so, and I spend a lot of time with it all. And I mean, and truth be told, when everybody's sending me messages at like, all hours of the days and night, 10 times out of 10 I'm in the middle of something else or in a meeting or doing other things that require my attention, and but I'm still responding to you, and I've gotten in a lot of trouble for doing that, a lot of trouble. But you're supposed to be able to get a hold of me, and I want to get back to you as fast as possible because again I value your work and time and attention, because I know when I was in school, I hated it when professors told me, "Oh, I'll get to your announcements in like a day or two." It's like but I need it now. So I know what that's like. Excuse me. Plus, I'm very high demanding, um, and so I demand a lot of myself, and so and consequently, I respect your time, but I also respect your work, and I demand a lot from your work, for the academic integrity of it all. That said, I want to jump into this article because I have some thoughts about NAGPRA and some ways to look at it and discuss it. And what I'm going to drop on you is coming out of, how many years now? At least 18 years of working and dealing with NAGPRA intimately. I've been dealing with Indigenous studies oh, coming up on almost 30 years. It'll be 28 years this year, And so, but it's getting close to that time. And what's happening here? So it's I wanted some analysis and some things that I've been dealing with and thinking about that are fresh and new. I want to drop on you, in particular the idea of storytelling. So let's take a look at this article really quick, and I want to start with what's on page 11. If you're using your Adobe Acrobat Reader, it's right before section 7, which is read campus wide collections engagement. And it's here, starting up at the sentence before that, at the bottom of page 10, where it says, the collaboration, the connections between the four directions, students, native students, with the Legion of Black Collegians, Asian American Association, an Hispanic leadership organization that represents minoritized student groups and student voices under the slogan Pride in the Past, Action in the Present, Vision for the Future. Okay, those three statements are very important. Pride in the past, action in the present, vision for the future. Now, you're going to say, like, okay, well, what's the big deal? And I know most of you would just read that and just kind of like gloss over and pass over it. And you're just like, what? Okay, got it. What it's doing is, excuse me, it's contextualizing what has happened in the past, referencing and giving it relevance and attention to what's happening now in the present, and then promoting and looking to where it's going to be going in the future. Philosophically speaking, most native tribes, as a pan-Indian identity and understanding, look at things that are happening seven generations in the future. What you're doing now has no as relevance and importance now. Has relevance and importance now. However, you're thinking at the scope and the arc of where it's going for your seven generations into the future. So you're not just looking for what's happening now. You're thinking how it's going to affect, your children, your children's children, your children's children's children, your children's children, children's children. You see what I'm saying? It's going on for those multiple generations, and that's what's important, because then looking at where you are, again, pan-Indian philosophically speaking, you're looking at where you are in position to that arc that came before you. So you're looking at the past. What did the past teach you about where you are concurrently, and then what it is that you have to do actively to be able to continue that the momentum and or adjust and change it for its benefit going seven generations into the future. So that slogan, oh, I gotta put on the old man glasses. Pride in the past, action in the present, vision for the future. You might just say, I read it, I get it, sounds good. Can we move on? But as I'm dropping it to you here, that's very important. And this section falls under storytelling. And this is what occurred to me that I really want to drop on you. And then there's a couple of other points in this article I want to bring to your attention. Is that NAGPRA actually, in in its attempt to work with native tribes, is actually a storytelling mechanism. Take that in for a second. NAGPRA, in its relationship to tribes, is actually a storytelling mechanism. It's a mechanic, it's a machine, it's a tool to use for tribes to use how it is that they tell their story of who they are. Now, I have a problem with the word storytelling, and this is what my hangup was. Literally, we're talking like 17, 18 years here in the making, like to come over this, and like occurred to me in 1 second. Why do I have a problem with storytelling? Well, okay. In relationship to native people, when you hear storytelling, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Fairy tales, right? Am I wrong? Fairy tales. And what is the one thing that native people are like bound to have to do when it comes to identity, understanding, and relevance and relationship in contemporary times? You have to identify yourself. You have to tell a story. You have to go through the history of what it is to be a relevant native and contemporary indigenous person. It's not automatic. And remember, because by federal law, Native people are the only ethnic group which must be able to tell their story. I'm sorry, give proof and identity as to whom they are. You can't just automatically say, I'm a Native person without having proof or evidence for it. You can say that you have heritage in a native, if from a native culture and tribe. That's more acceptable and flexible. However, native identity is negotiable and non-negotiable simultaneously. That's very important. Right now, we're dealing with the climate issue, right? The summit, the UN climate. What is it? COP3 that's going on. And I was just reading quickly. I was reading because I had to get back to the article on indigenous tribes, specifically from the Amazon and Amazonian areas, that are fighting for a representation and identity, as well as specifically, the indigenous women of the Amazonian tribes who are looking for their voice to be heard. Now, as somebody who deals with critical feminist theory, I find that to be extremely problematic because I want to hear their voices. I want to know what's going on with it. And so I see it as a crime against humanity that the native female voices are not heard. That's me. That's not everybody else. But what is it that the women are doing? They're having to get on a platform, a global stage and platform, to tell their story and history and relationship to the context of where we are. So the preponderance of evidence to prove who you are as a native indigenous person in the global context and structure precludes that you tell all the history of who you are up to this point. Then you can make your argument, and then you have to go on with it all. Now, who's going to listen to 500 plus years of history to get to this point? I mean, talk about hitting the snooze a couple of hundred times. And as one who had to do that this morning, in order to kind of compress and whatever limited amount of sleep I was able to get, I understand that. I don't want to hear it. And then which legislation is going to want to sit there and listen to that history and storytelling as well? Excuse me, not many. So when they had the platform, and then let's take it one step further, tease this whole idea out. How much time do you have when you're in the United Nations, or in any kind of legislative forum to be able to present your case? You're on the clock. So especially when you're an outside entity making a presentation to them, you're literally on the clock. You don't have open available time, that's given to you. If you've ever gone to any kind of a city council meeting or a school board meeting or association or anything like that, you're going to hear it. I mean, when I was a commissioner of the arts and it came time for open forum, and citizens feedback and whatnot, they were told how much time they had, between 10, 12, 15 minutes or, 20 minutes if it was like, a core case or whatever. And I'm just thinking, man, what a poor soul. You're barely going to scratch the surface on what's going on. You're not able to get into any depth of what's happening. And just when I want to hear the content of it, it's like, the clock goes off. It's like time. It's the same deal. So storytelling is a very important element. It's a very important, issue and item. However, when you hear it in particular in relationship to native and indigenous communities, you hear fantasy. You hear it and put it in relation to it's a fictitious, imagination, fantastical thing that comes up with it, right? Think Disneyland. Okay, Knott's Berry Farm. Any kind of these places. I mean, Disney is the perfect one, right? The Disneyfication of our minds that we have, where it's you go into this, this sacred space and place where time is frozen and stopped, and then everything is talked about and come through, a whitewashed, sanitized version of what that history is supposed to be, based upon somebody's ideal of a pure, sanitized context of the world that is frozen in time, encapsulated, and colonized and disciplined and doctrined by somebody's ramifications and fallacy, their imagined idea of what that perfect external other is supposed to be. Native people have to talk about that in relationship in order to get any relevance going. NAGPRA is a tool. It's a tool for Native people to tell their story. And so, what is it that's being reclaimed? It's not just the bones and the funerary objects, which is the core element that we see. That's the physical nature of it. However, it's the stories, it's the tribal history that's actually being repatriated. It's the tribal history and knowledge, customs and cultures, the traditional knowledge, the TK, that's coming to light, that's actually being resurfaced. It's a revitalization in a process, necessary for tribes to have equal sensibility, reference, and relevance on a national, local, national, okay, local, state, national, and global stage. That's where it is, because it has to hit all these different levels and whatnot. But the tribes are stuck with the preponderance of evidence to prove whom they are and give credibility to it. You've watched a bunch of TED Talks already, especially ones that have come from tribal members. What's one of the first things that they do consistently? They're going to identify who they are, where they come from, and then where they are. The presentation I did today, okay, or yesterday, or whenever it was, I've lost track of time. When they said, introduce yourself and who you are. I started off, a home in Takoyas on my relations, a whole come, my name is Alan Lechusa Aquio, I'm a member of Los Leño and Maidu, nations. And I come to you from my occupied territories of the Los Leño Nation down in Southern California. It's kind of gives a real brief, thumbnail sketch of who I am and where I come from, rather than going in through and saying, now let's really talk about what's happened. You want to talk about the missionized situation that happened, and going through all these kind of things. And why is it that we were called Luiseño? Because of the San Luis River, and which is totally wrong. We're the Ataxan people. It's a, and getting into all of that kind of stuff. It's, but Native people must do that. So the idea of storytelling for me is problematic, because what it does, as soon as you hear that in relation to Native people, is that you all of a sudden are having to minimize your history as a tribal entity into a fantasized compartment, mythical understanding and misnomer of what it is, to be a Native person. So the content, the relevance, the importance, the intent, and the lived experiences of Native people, are trapped, and they're not given the life and the existence that they are. The vitality of each of those is not present when you say storytelling. And that's just a problem that I have, with the discourse, right, with the lexicon of it. And it's because it's storytelling. Now I know that, like, excuse me, there's specific tribes, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, where they lean on storytelling is very important. Think of the potlatch for the people, up yeah, like the Suquamish, Nawamish, Duwamish, people up in the Oregon, Washington, state area, and going up into British Columbia. When they do their potlatch ceremony, the whole thing, from the 4 to 7 days that they do it traditionally, is that they're telling the story of their creation, and that's what they have to do. But they're acting it out, they're representing it, but they're doing it to their community. So storytelling there is actually a retelling. It's not storytelling, it's that you're retelling the history of your people. So it should, so for me, it would be remove the word story and just put it as history telling, identity telling. It's replacing that. So you're getting rid of this of the word story, because it's like, you read, a story, to kind of help you pass your time. You read these kind of things. But when you go in and you have to do your history class, so they tell you, okay, now you're going to read a story on World War I, World War II, Korea, Afghanistan. Are you gonna now you're gonna read a story about these things? No, they tell you you're reading history, right? When you go into your philosophy classes, and they say, okay, I need you to read Kant and Kantian theory, which I was just reading, last night. Love Kant, love Immanuel Kant. Ugh, miss those days of sitting in coffee shops and like immersing myself with like stacks of books of, reading all of his things, and and losing track of time, for epochs on end. Miss those days. Anyways, you know, but when you're reading Kant, and you're reading his treatise on aesthetics, let's say your philosophy teachers will say, okay, now you're reading a story, that Kant wrote about imagination and aesthetics. No, he tells you you're reading philosophy. It's got a proper term. So why is it that when we come and we talk about native issues, in particular in a Native and Indigenous Studies course, that we rely on the term storytelling? Why? It's history, its relevance, its identity, its tribal equity and responsibility, its sovereignty and self-determination, it's a decolonizing, understanding and vitality of the tribal knowledge that's there. Why don't you just call it that? Okay, today we're going to take this approach to traditional knowledge, vis-a-vis, this article. And what is it telling us about the traditional knowledge of Native people? Why does it have to be storytelling? I have a problem with that term. And for NAGPRA, it works perfectly because NAGPRA is a tool for Native people to use to unpackage what is assumed as storytelling. And because it's the front word, it's story. And that's what encapsulates. And goes back to the argument that Gerald Visner makes, with this Indian, is Indianness. And this goes back to the argument that Fritz Scholder, the artist, talks about when he said that nobody wanted to paint the Indian, and there was no reason to paint the Indian because it was a fallacy. It doesn't exist. So he started his Indian, not Indian, artistic series. This is what Jane Quickstasy talks about when she paints her maps. This is what David Scher, when he talks and does a review of Alcatraz and its importance, not only for the tribal people in the Bay Area, but also for its importance in American history from a Native perspective. This is what Kent Mockman does with his representation of Ms. Chief, where he gender crosses and dresses up like a female, Native person, and performs in a fantastical show of the 1880s. And this is what George Morrison with his works. They're going on. Jimmy Johnson, a guy that I was just helping and supporting work with, with his discussion of what's happening right now contemporaneously. It get rid of story. It's history telling. It's philosophical telling. It's identity, understanding. It's in not construction. It's identity understanding. Even though we have to federally construct who we are, as Native people, day to day to day. Excuse me. You can't just go and state and claim who you are and say you're a Native person without having that formal recognition. But a Puerto Rican person can do it. Somebody who's Latine, Latino, Latina, Mexican, Mexican, Aztec, they can do it. An African American person can do it. Somebody who's mulatto and mixed, they can do it. They can say where they're all from. Anybody from a European, perspective can do that. And there's a whole discipline related to it now with the whiteness, right? There's the study of whiteness and its equitability, inside of it. And critical race theory doesn't even touch any of this. NAGPRA is assigned to Native people specifically, into the repatriation and assigning and understanding Native history and giving access back to Native people of their history. But it's history that's being told in the physical objects, the funerary objects, the bones, and whatnot. But what this article starts to get into and starts to explore it, but just falls short, and this is my argument for it, is it goes on down which with section 7 it talks about the works that are being brought up, and it talks about not just the limitations now of of bones and whatnot, but it also talks about the folios and the images and the photography and these kinds of things. As you go down into section 8 for professional praxis. And this one's really kind of cool because it starts in 8.1 with the confronting the data gaps. They start talking about, what are the pitfalls that happen inside of NAGPRA and the relationships that the committees have found, right? And it gets kind of heady, towards its understanding with it, but read through it because at least it's interesting to kind of see how it is that these inter that these departments work, and connect themselves together, and specifically pay attention to at the bottom of page 14, where they talk about, here it is. It says, quote, only two burials could be traced by art by artifactual evidence to the Sac and Fox tribe. Here it is. All other human remains and funeral objects were of prehistoric origin. This is important. The understanding of prehistoric origins versus those that can actually be traced back to a tribe. Because the things that are considered to be prehistoric origins, there's NAGPRA does not comply because there's no way to trace it back. And that's important. Okay. And then it goes down. This is the important one. 8.2 land grants information transparency is because they talk about I'm sorry. Go back up a little bit on page 15, where it talks in the middle portion where it talks about the controlled vocabulary field and set of records, as well as for the items to remain in the subjects of the tribal consultation or SHPO resolution and or are stored on behalf of the tribes for the agency. The objects are stored on behalf of the tribe or the agency. This is important. Here it says, quote, the latter can include repatriated items a tribe has not yet come to collect, perhaps because a change in the shortage of staff or space, or reluctance to take the remains outside of Missouri. There is no federal reservation on Missouri. Okay, they talk about that, and then the databases provide digital documentation and whatnot, but it's here at the very bottom of it. It says, thus, we see that the student-led actions cause the visible process to shift over time as a focus on repatriation to one of summary, inventory, and ongoing consultation with the tribes. Now, I presented all that context at the beginning about repatriation, the stored elements on behalf of the tribe, because this is important, because the tribes can either say that they don't have the access to it, they don't have the storage space, they don't have the manpower, they don't have the availability, whatever, to be able to take back the possession. So they make an active decision to leave some of the remains, although they have access to them, inside the museums for their actual protection. What it is that the students worked in collaboration with the tribes to be able to get the proper identification of it there. That is history telling. The tribes are saying, look, we understand and recognize this is who we are in object form. The students who are doing the work are saying, okay, in order for us to identify properly what it is and following NAGPRA guidelines, you tell us how it is that these are supposed to be maintained, noted, and represented. That connection is going from just documentation, raw, documentation that just kind of fulfills a quota, all of a sudden to tribal consultation and negotiation is history telling. The tribes now are expressing traditional knowledge using NAGPRA as a tool in order to do so. That's why this is important. Is it, and that's what I'm saying. I have a problem with storytelling. I don't understand the use of the word story. I'm dropping this on you because this has been bugging me. Literally, I guess now for 18 years, this has been really bugging me. And I'll tell you, one of the songs that kind of brings this up again, time and time again, is Three Doors Down. Love Me When I'm Gone. I know, you think I'm like, what? Yeah. When you listen to the words, if you think of it as an analysis of NAGPRA, love me when I'm gone, the gone means that the remains of the person are dead. The stories are gone and they're lost. So who's doing the loving? It's the anthropologists who are loving, quote unquote, the finding the remains of these native people, but taking it out of context. And who is the one that is actually trying to then, tell the story properly? Is the tribes. And what are the tribes doing? They're not trying to tell a story. They're trying to put the knowledge and understanding, the tribal reference onto what it is being done, irrevertibly upon the tribes. Get away from the Disneyfication of native identity and put it in context to self-determination, rights, and sovereignty based upon tribal knowledge, customs, traditions, cultures, expressions, environmental, social, political, social, religious, philosophical, and spiritual understanding to contextualize what is tribal knowledge, to give credibility to how NAGPRA can be used to articulate a currency and importance of Native people coming from the past, working in the present, and looking to how it is that the future generations are going to understand it. This article has a lot more depth in it, ladies and gentlemen, than even what we look at from the surface. And I had to drop that on you because it was just bugging me to death as I'm reading this, and it like hit me like, like a lightning bolt, in in moments that I'd rather not even speak about, when it like all came to me. As you finish and you read, through 8.2 and you go down, pay attention to, to some of its relationships, to the tribes and their meetings and whatnot, in the preservation of it all. When you look at section 9, it's talking about the active living and legacy. This goes on, to what I'm talking about, because here it talks about the reconstruction of history to the present day obligations. That's what I've been talking about. And then it goes down, and section 10 is important. Okay, I know we're not gonna get a time to kind of look at it and go through it, because it talks about, yes, down here on page 20, where they gives you the representation and their association with the Australian archival disciplines. And there's like 3 points that they bring up. Read those three. And here it is in the middle of page 20, where it says, quote, Australia presents one possible future American archives could see. There are 3 distinct protocols addressed Aboriginal and Torres Straits Islander issues and information services. These are bomb. These are bomb. Okay. And I'm in the process of trying to actually formalize, what is it? The Indigenous Interdisciplinary um, hip hop studies forum, and moving away from the Indigenous Hip Hop Business Association that I work at as a managing editor, and trying to promote and expand this on my own, and using these models. Man, this is like screaming, so important. If America would only take a look at what's going on in the other parts of the Aboriginal and Indigenous worlds and communities, Native people here in America would not be fighting the government as much as they are, because the structures have already been put in place, and it's not telling or retelling a story. It's localizing and positioning it as traditional knowledge that exists for tribal entities. If you took away anything, you should understand TK at this point, tribal knowledge, and its relationship, and understanding that NAGPRA is actually a tool. It's not the end all be all. It's just a tool to not tell a story, but to unfold the past, the present, and the future by its formation to relationship to traditional tribal knowledge. I unload a lot on you. Thanks. Talk to you soon. You have any questions or such, or you just want to like scream at me, then just send me an email. I'll talk to you. Thanks.